Nobody expected this. The View was in control until one calm sentence broke the room. Whoopi pushed harder. The audience waited for an argument. But Thomas Sowell didn't fight back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't blink. And that's when the silence hit. Because the moment wasn't loud. It was devastating. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Now let's dive into what really happened. It started with silence, the kind that makes people lean closer to their screens. No music, no interruption, just a pause, followed by one sentence that instantly shifted the mood in the room. What was supposed to be another routine political discussion on The View suddenly became something far bigger. At first, everything felt familiar. The panel was seated. The topic was loaded. The opinions were strong. Viewers at home expected the usual rhythm, passionate opinions, quick interruptions, and emotional reactions. But then something unexpected happened. Thomas Sowell spoke. And instead of raising his voice, instead of reacting emotionally, he did something rare on daytime television. He slowed the conversation down. Within minutes, social media caught fire. Short clips began circulating across platforms. Comment sections filled up faster than usual. People weren't arguing about tone or volume. They were arguing about ideas. And one name kept trending again and again, Thomas Sowell. Sowell is not known for theatrics. He doesn't perform for applause. He doesn't chase viral moments. His reputation has been built over decades on calm reasoning, historical analysis, and an almost surgical approach to debate. And that contrast between his style and the usual atmosphere of The View made the moment feel electric. He didn't interrupt. He didn't insult. He didn't shout anyone down. Yet, by the end of the exchange, many viewers felt that The View, and especially Whoopi Goldberg, had completely lost control of the narrative. And that's what made this moment so powerful. This wasn't about who talked the loudest. This wasn't about who got the last word. This wasn't even about politics alone. This was about two completely different ways of thinking colliding live on television. On one side was emotion, personal experience, and moral urgency. On the other was data, history, and long-term consequences. Neither side was screaming, but the tension was undeniable. As the discussion unfolded, viewers noticed something unusual. The usual rhythm of the show began to break down. The rapid-fire back and forth slowed. Attempts to redirect the conversation didn't land the same way. The energy in the room shifted from confident to uncertain, and audiences felt it. Many supporters later described the segment as uncomfortable to watch, not because it was rude or chaotic, but because it challenged assumptions that rarely get challenged in that space. Others said it was one of the most revealing moments the show had aired in years. Not revealing because of drama, but because of restraint. In a media landscape built on reaction, this moment stood out because of reflection. Sowell's calm delivery forced the conversation into unfamiliar territory. It asked viewers to think instead of react, and that made some people uneasy. By the time the segment ended, the reaction was already sealed. Clips were being shared not with captions about yelling or walk-offs, but with phrases like, "Watch how calm he stays," and "This is what real debate looks like." Supporters didn't say he won by overpowering anyone. They said he won by changing the rules of the conversation. And that's why this moment is still being talked about. Because sometimes the most powerful moments on television aren't loud. They're quiet, measured, and impossible to ignore. The conversation began the way The View often does. Familiar, predictable, and emotionally charged. The topic centered on social inequality, government responsibility, and long-standing systemic issues in America. These are subjects the show has covered countless times, and viewers expected the usual format: strong opinions, passionate arguments, and moral certainty. Whoopi Goldberg took the lead early. She spoke with conviction, drawing from lived experience and emotional truth. Her words carried urgency and frustration, reflecting the belief that government action is not just necessary, but morally required to fix deep-rooted problems. This approach has always been central to The View's identity. The show doesn't just debate policy, it speaks from the heart. For a moment, everything followed the script. Then Thomas Sowell responded. And instead of meeting emotion with emotion, he did something unexpected. He reframed the conversation entirely. Sowell didn't challenge anyone's intentions. He didn't question anyone's character. Instead, he shifted the focus to history, economics, and consequences. His tone remained calm, almost academic, but his message carried weight. He began referencing past policies that were created with good intentions, but produced unintended results. He spoke about patterns that repeat across decades, not because people are cruel, but because incentives matter. Systems respond to outcomes, not emotions. This was the moment the tension quietly entered the room. Sowell challenged one of the most powerful assumptions in modern political discussion, the idea that government solutions automatically lead to positive change, not by denying inequality, but by asking whether certain approaches actually improve lives in the long run. And that's when the contrast became impossible to ignore. While the panel spoke in terms of what should happen, Sowell spoke in terms of what has happened. While intentions were emphasized, he emphasized results. And every time a claim was made, he returned to one steady question. What does the data actually show? It wasn't confrontational. It wasn't aggressive, but it was disruptive. That single question slowed the conversation down. It forced a pause. Suddenly, the discussion wasn't about feelings alone. It was about proof. And in a format built for fast reactions, that shift created discomfort. The energy in the room changed. Attempts to move on from the question didn't land the same way. Emotional appeals, which normally carried the segment forward, now felt incomplete without evidence to back them up. Viewers could sense it, not through raised voices, but through hesitation. Sowell's approach didn't deny people's struggles. Instead, it challenged whether popular solutions were truly helping or quietly making things worse over time. He argued that ignoring data in favor of ideology leads to repeated failure, no matter how noble the goal. This was an attack on individuals. It was an attack on assumptions. And that's what made it tense. Because when ideology meets reality, reality doesn't argue. It presents results. Sowell didn't claim moral high ground. He claimed historical consistency. And that distinction put the panel in unfamiliar territory. For viewers at home, this moment felt different. They weren't watching a debate unfold. They were watching two worldviews collide, one driven by urgency and moral responsibility, the other driven by evidence and long-term impact. And in that moment, the room fell out of rhythm. The usual flow of the view was disrupted, not by chaos, but by clarity. And once it happened, there was no easy way to reset the conversation, because when one simple question changes the rules, everything that follows feels different. As the discussion moved forward, something subtle but unmistakable began to happen. Viewers watching closely noticed a visible shift in Whoopi Goldberg's demeanor. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't angry, but she no longer looked fully in control. She looked unsettled. For years, Whoopi has been one of the strongest voices on The View. She knows how to steer conversations, redirect debates, and bring discussions back to familiar ground. Normally, when a guest challenges a panel, the rhythm stays intact. This time it didn't. And the reason was simple, but powerful. Thomas Sowell wasn't doing what most guests do. He wasn't attacking anyone personally. He wasn't dismissing real-life struggles. He wasn't questioning motives or morality. Instead, he was doing something far more difficult to counter. He was exposing contradictions. Each time an emotional argument was presented, Sowell responded calmly with outcomes. Each time a solution was described as necessary, he asked whether it had actually worked in the past. His tone never changed. His posture stayed relaxed. And that calmness only added to the pressure. Whoopi attempted to redirect the conversation, something she has done successfully countless times before. She shifted toward broader themes, moral responsibility, and urgency, but Sowell gently and consistently brought it back to one central idea. Results matter more than intentions. That's when the dynamic truly changed. The more emotionally charged the pushback became, the more composed Sowell appeared. He didn't rush to respond. He didn't interrupt. He waited, then answered carefully, almost clinically. And that contrast made the tension in the room grow. Viewers could feel it. This wasn't the kind of tension created by raised voices or dramatic walk-offs. This was quieter, heavier, the kind of tension that comes when a conversation stops following its usual script. And that's why this moment is now being talked about so widely. Not because Whoopi lost an argument, not because anyone was humiliated, but because the format itself seemed to struggle. The View thrives on fast-paced reactions, emotional clarity, and strong moral framing. But Sowell didn't fit into any of those boxes. He refused to play the expected role of the loud oppositional guest or the defensive outsider. There were no sound bites, no viral one-liners, no dramatic escalation, just methodical reasoning. And that's what made it uncomfortable. When Whoopi pushed emotionally, Sowell didn't push back emotionally. He waited for evidence. When the conversation tried to move forward, he gently pulled it back to unresolved questions. The usual tools, interruption, redirection, urgency, didn't have the same effect. At one point, the discussion seemed to slow almost to a stop, not because anyone froze, but because the logic demanded space. The panel couldn't simply move on without addressing the points being raised. That's when viewers realized something important. This wasn't about personalities anymore. It was about ideas that refused to be brushed aside. The tension wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was intellectual. And in many ways, that made it far more powerful than any shouting match ever could. People watching at home weren't choosing sides based on volume. They were watching to see who could actually answer the questions being asked. And for some, the silence between responses spoke louder than any argument. By the end of the exchange, it was clear that the conversation hadn't gone where the View expected it to go. The usual balance was gone. The rhythm was broken, not by chaos, but by calm. And that's exactly why this moment left such a lasting impression. Thomas Sowell's impact on that moment didn't come from dominance, volume, or theatrical performance. It came from discipline. In a media world where attention is often won by who speaks the loudest, Sowell stood out by doing the opposite. He chose precision over passion and restraint over reaction. And that choice made all the difference. Sowell spoke from a place shaped by decades of research, writing, and historical study. Instead of focusing on what policies were meant to do, he focused on what they actually did. He pointed to examples from the past, programs introduced with compassion and urgency that, over time, produced consequences no one had planned for. His argument wasn't that people had bad intentions. It was that good intentions are not enough. He explained how incentives shape human behavior, often in ways that policymakers fail to predict. When systems reward certain actions, people respond accordingly, sometimes in ways that undermine the original goal. Ignore that reality, Sowell argued, and mistakes get repeated generation after generation. For many viewers, this perspective felt refreshing. They were used to hearing debates framed in moral absolutes, right versus wrong, caring versus uncaring. Sowell offered something different. He asked viewers to slow down and examine whether popular solutions were actually helping the people they were designed to protect. But for others, it was deeply uncomfortable, because questioning outcomes can feel like questioning compassion itself. And in modern discourse, challenging a solution is often mistaken for dismissing a problem. Sowell carefully avoided that trap. He never denied inequality. He never minimized suffering. Instead, he asked one difficult thing of the audience: to think beyond slogans. He didn't claim moral superiority. He didn't accuse anyone of being evil. He didn't frame the discussion as good people versus bad people. He framed it as effective solutions versus ineffective ones. And that distinction matters. Supporters later said Sowell destroyed the argument, but not the individuals making it. What he dismantled were assumptions that had gone largely unchallenged. He exposed how emotionally satisfying ideas can still fail in practice, and how ignoring evidence in favor of ideology leads to repeated disappointment. In a media environment driven by outrage, speed, and instant reactions, Sowell represented something rare: intellectual restraint. He allowed uncomfortable questions to sit unanswered. He didn't rush to simplify complex issues. And he didn't back away when the discussion became tense. That restraint became the most powerful part of the exchange. Viewers didn't share clips because someone shouted or stormed off. They shared them because the conversation felt different, clear, focused, grounded. The moment went viral not due to chaos, But due to clarity, people replayed the segment not to watch conflict, but to listen again. They want to catch the details, the reasoning, the quiet confidence behind the words. And that's why Sowell's message landed so hard. It reminded viewers of something often missing from modern debates, that truth doesn't need volume, and persuasion doesn't require humiliation. Sometimes, the most effective way to challenge an idea is simply to ask whether it works. In that moment, Sowell didn't just participate in a discussion. He changed its tone. He shifted the focus from emotion to evidence, from urgency to understanding. And in doing so, he left a lasting impression. Not because he overwhelmed anyone, but because he made people think. This wasn't just a TV segment. It was a mirror held up to modern media, modern debate, and the way we now process serious ideas. What played out on that stage wasn't simply an exchange between guests. It was a collision between two different worlds. On one side was long-form thinking, ideas shaped over decades, supported by history, evidence, and reflection. On the other was short-form media, a format built for speed, emotion, and immediate reactions. When those two worlds met, the tension was unavoidable. The moment exposed something many viewers already felt but rarely saw so clearly. Modern debates aren't designed for depth. They're designed for momentum. The faster the exchange, the better the ratings. The stronger the emotion, the louder the response. But calm logic doesn't always fit neatly into that structure, and when it doesn't, the system struggles. That's exactly what happened here. Thomas Sowell didn't overwhelm the conversation with force. He slowed it down, and in doing so, he revealed the limits of a debate culture that often rewards passion over preparation and certainty over curiosity. Whether you agree with Sowell or not, one thing became clear: volume is not the same as authority. This moment reminded viewers that arguments aren't always won by who speaks the loudest or the longest. Sometimes, they're won by who has done the homework, by who understands history, by who is willing to ask uncomfortable questions and wait for real answers. For The View, it was a rare moment where the usual structure didn't hold. The fast-paced rhythm, the emotional framing, the smooth redirection, none of it worked the way it normally does. The show wasn't defeated, but it was challenged in a way it isn't often challenged. For Whoopi Goldberg, it was a reminder that passion alone isn't always enough to carry a conversation to its conclusion. Emotion can open a discussion, but it doesn't always close it. When faced with calm persistence and evidence, even the strongest personalities can find themselves off balance. And for viewers, this moment carried an important lesson. It showed that ideas matter more than insults, that clarity lasts longer than outrage, and that respect for complexity doesn't weaken an argument, it strengthens it. That's why this exchange didn't fade away after the episode ended. It lived on in clips, discussions, and comment sections because it touched something deeper than entertainment. It raised questions about how we talk to each other and whether we still make room for serious thought in public conversation. In an era of instant reactions, this moment stood out because it demanded patience. In a culture driven by emotion, it stood out because it demanded evidence. And in a media landscape crowded with noise, it stood out because it was quiet, but impossible to ignore. That's the real reason this moment still matters. Not because someone was embarrassed, not because someone lost, but because it reminded us that the most powerful ideas don't need to shout. And long after the cameras stopped rolling, that message is still echoing.